Hello, hello, mic check. Am I sharing? Yep, I am. Okay. Let's get this show on the road. Now, PowerPoints. I'll a little bit. Now the lights down low. Feels warm and sleepy. Now, before I begin, you can have this thing up, and if you look at look at the author of this this course shell, you see how they have all these questions. Okay. Now, if there's a quiz on this topic, and the quiz is 10 items, and the author already gave you 24, right? He or she is already giving the playbook. So it's in your best interest to start doing what? Like during the lecture, right? When you start seeing something like this, then start filling it out, right? Instead of having to Google it or whatever later, so that when you're in lecture, it keeps you awake. So what are we talking about? We're talking about blood. Now, anatomy and physiology, there's parts to it. That's the anatomy. So you have the cells. You have red blood cells, white blood cells, and platelets. And those of us who had a medical terminology, erythro means red, leuco means white, and thrombo means clotting. So platelets. So right off the bat, I have parts. And if you just take a look at your I just keep on calling it IR. When you look at those questions, doesn't they ask that? And if we recall our medical terminology, the function of the red blood cell was to carry things. Okay? So if we look at the red blood cell here, okay, we're going to talk a little bit more about in detail in a minute. Doesn't it look like a lifesaver? You know when they throw that thing overboard. When they have somebody falls off a boat. Why do they always assume it's a man? I don't know why. Maybe because we're not so bright. Man overboard. So what do they throw over? A lifesaver. And what does a lifesaver do? It holds things. So the function of the red blood cell is to carry things. Carries nutrients, sugar, oxygen, nitrogen, carbon dioxide. So it carries a whole bunch of things. Now, white blood cells are leukocytes. Those are these things right here. Oh, why am I pointing with my finger? This is a video. They're much bigger than the red blood cells, and they are, this is how I remember it. What does a white knight or a knight in shining armor do? They come to the rescue. What do leukocytes do? White blood cells. They come to the rescue. Right now, there are 250 things that can easily kill you in this room. But why are we not dying? And also all that stuff on the media, the scary RSV, COVID. Why don't we all die just right now? Because we have white blood cells, leukocytes, that are fighting infection. There's a battle going on right now. Morning, sir. Welcome. There's a battle going on right now. And who does that battle? White blood cells. They only get called upon when there is an infection. And last but not least, platelets. Also in your body, there's little cuts opening up, and we have to do a clot. So what does a clot do? Thrombus. It's sticky, and it gums things up so that you don't bleed out. If I had no platelets, what will happen? I'll bleed out, and I'll die. Because don't you think I need the other red blood cells, white blood cells? I need all of this. It's integral for me to live. So I want you to look at cells, which are microscopic, and I want you to look at blood as an actual living thing with things in it. So you see now, what does it have in it? Cells. In other textbooks, these cells, they're called formed elements. Or, They're the dry parts of this blood. Remember, I could take whole blood, and what do? If I centrifuge it, what will happen? All the heavy stuff will go to the bottom, and what will be left? You'll have the fluid portion of your blood. So they could ask you, what's the solid portion of your blood? Well, it's this stuff. Red blood cells, white blood cells, and platelets. And what's the water portion of the blood? And that's your plasma. And it has proteins in it, it has gases, there's other nutrients in it, and of course, if there's nutrients in it, there's also waste. So that's in there. And you see plasma is just a little bit more than your formed elements. But what makes the majority of your cells, you can see here visually, it's your red blood cells. And then you have this thing called the buffy coat, which is a little bit of white blood cells, a little bit of platelets. But I got a ton of red blood cells. And just as a side note, the ratio between the cells and the plasma is called your hematocrit. When we do a CBC, I need to know your hydration status, and this can tell me. So for example, if I'm well hydrated, my hematocrit would be 55% because the plasma is what? 55% of this whole. But what if I had less plasma? Don't you think I'd be dehydrated? And what if I had more plasma? I'll be what? Overhydrated. Now, those of you who haven't had it before, if you recall your medical terminology, homeostasis. Homeo means the same, and stasis means to stand in one place. So all your body wants to be is what? Normal. The rule is you should be here and here, right? For example, oxygen is really cool, right? But I need it to be where? In the middle. Too much oxygen. If I flood this room with oxygen, in about 40 minutes or so, all of us will be blind. And the exact opposite. If I take away the little oxygen we have in this room, typically oxygen is around 21% atmospheric air. If I got it down to like 10%, 8%, we'd all start feeling the effects and we'd all start gasping and then eventually fall asleep. Homeostasis. We need to be where? In the middle. Too much of a good thing becomes a what? Bad thing. Too little of a good thing becomes a bad thing. So can I have too many red blood cells? Sure. Can I have too many white blood cells? Sure. That's called an infection. Can I have too many platelets? Sure. Can I have the exact opposite? Too little of any of that? So I need to be where? In balance. Another balance thing is this pH. And what does pH actually mean? pH actually means the negative log of the concentration of the hydrogen ion. What does that mean? It just means that, you know, your electrolytes like H plus, which is an acid, and OH minus, which is a base. Again, homeostasis, they need to be in balance. And where's the balance? The pH of 7.35 to 7.45 or 7.4 is where? Dead middle. Is it good if I'm acidic? Nope. Is it good if I'm alkaline or basic? No. Where do I need to be? I need to be always in the middle. And guess who also controls that? Blood as well. Right? Also your lungs. And of course, we already mentioned the temperature. Right? 38 degrees Celsius, 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit. Where should my body temperature be? Here. If my body temperature raises, I got a what? I got a fever. Is that a good thing? No. Well, low-grade fever is okay. If it's like 99, it's good. Because you want to make your body nice and hot so that all the viruses and all the other pathogenic material get cooked. But greater than 99, when you start getting 100, 101, oh, then you start cooking the brain, which is never a good thing. Then you go get seizures, and then maybe a coma. So, too much temperature, is that a bad thing? Yep. Too little temperature. Anyone ever had hypothermia? Nobody? No? No one ever jumped in a vat of cold water for an extended period of time and your lips turn blue and you can't answer simple basic questions like your name or what 2 times 2 is? What movie is that? Was that Chris Kyle, the American Sniper? There's a documentary from the 90s that they play bits and pieces of it in the beginning of the movie. And you see these young men, especially they're at Coronado amphibious base, and they're swimming in 60-degree water. You swim in 60-degree water long enough, what's going to happen? Where's your temperature? It needs to be where? 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit. What's going to happen if you're in 60-degree water for an extended period of time, especially if you're skinny? Right? You'll do what? You'll get hypothermia. And remember we talked about fever? My brain will cook. I'll get seizures. I'll go into a coma. All a coma is your brain going, nah, I don't want to be here. You're giving me a really bad place to live, so I'm just going to shut off for a little while. That's what a coma is. And hypothermia is what? The exact opposite. Right? And it's good that none of you know what hypothermia is, because that means you're so cold that now all your chemical processes start shutting down. So we look at this. There's a lot of answers in this, isn't it? Okay. And what's the importance of it? We already talked about it. Red blood cell has to carry things. So I have things that are important, like ions. Remember, that's a pH. An ion is just a chemical that has a little charge. So if you see an H plus, that means it's an acid. If you see an OH minus, that means it's a base. And a plus and a minus means it's a charged particle. It means it's going to react to things, right? And of course, an acid, right? I put an acid on your car, what it'll do to the metal on your car? It'll react to it. It'll start eating up the paint, wouldn't it? If I took sodium hydroxide, which is a very strong base, and I started putting it on your car as well, what's it going to do? It's going to do the exact same thing. It's going to start eating away at the metal in your car, right? So I need them in balance. Nutrients, proteins, gases, they all have to come in. And the wastes all have to do what? Go out. So that's the importance of blood. And if I don't have enough of it, will I have good physiology? If I don't have good physiology, what happens? I have pathology, right? And too much of a good thing and too little of a good thing. And of course, white blood cell, I want you to think immunity. If you don't have enough white blood cells, let's say HIV positive. HIV positive. What cell, do you guys have any family members or know what cell we monitor for HIV patients?
The T cell?
T cells. Yep, the T helper cell, which is a what? A white blood cell. So HIV knew exactly what to attack. The T helper cell, right? Which is called the CD4 cell. So what happens if I don't have enough white blood cells? I won't have an immune process. If I don't have an immune process, remember the 250 things that can kill me in this room? My cousin Baal, HIV for 10 years. If he's not on his meds, if he doesn't take care of himself and he's sitting in this room, the 250 things in this room that make us cough and sneeze could kill him easily. Because if he doesn't have enough white blood cells, does he have any immunity? No. Now, let's look at the exact opposite. If you have an infection, you have too many white blood cells. Now, if you got too many warriors, what are you going to have? You're going to have a war. So if you got a lot of soldiers, a lot of warriors, that means there's a war going on. And then what happens in a war? A lot of death, right? And we're going to talk about that when you have an infection. That's why you feel so bad and can't move too well. And last but not least, we already know that blood has to be where? In the middle, and that's what? Homeostasis. So I can't have too much blood, I can't have too little blood, I just need what? The right amount of blood. And it's got to be flowing all the time. And there's a liquid portion of it, which is plasma, which is a little bit more than half, and red blood cells, which is the majority of the formed elements, but just a little bit of white blood cells and platelets. Now, what does that tell us? Are you bleeding all day, every day? No, sometimes. Do you have a lot of infection on a given normal day? No, just a little. So do I need a lot of white blood cells and platelets? No. But what am I doing all day, every day with those lifesavers? Don't you think I'm transporting them all day, every day? So when you're looking at blood, look at it as the parts. You have the wet parts and the dry parts and the functions, which are all these that we just talked about. Now, what's in plasma? Hormones. Hormones are chemical messengers. Nutrients, gases, water, and of course waste. So the plasma is important because it has things in it, and it's the reason why. Did you guys ever wonder why, when the doctor has all these different tubes, anyone here, anyone here got blood taken recently? Like, why do they have to take so many darn tubes? Because one of those tubes, you'll see it has the red top, or it's a red speckled top, and it has like it looks like wax on the bottom, and that is your serum separator tube, or your SST. And what's it doing? It's going to separate the plasma from your red blood cell, white blood cell, and platelet. And so I know if there's things in there. And one of the things that they didn't mention here, hormones are protein messengers. Another thing that's in plasma is immunoglobulins. Did you ever go to, like, you try to get a job and then they say, oh, when's the last time you had your tetanus booster? And you go, I don't know, 2008. Okay, we're gonna check for titer. Did you ever hear that? They're gonna check for the levels of hormones and immunoglobulins, or the immune proteins in your blood. If they're of a certain level, then you don't have to get the booster shot. But if they're short, what do you have to get? The booster shot. And that's why I found really funny about this whole COVID mess. And those of you who already had me before know that I'm a borderline conspiracy theorist. Not borderline, I'm a conspiracy theorist. But here's the problem. I'm a conspiracy theorist because I'm a scientist, I'm a chemist, I taught epidemiology for 10 years at the university level. Now, when you take a vaccine, don't you think the hormones and the chemicals should appear in your plasma? You guys can try to look it up. What plasma levels that are good enough for COVID. You can find them for any other virus, but not COVID. And then when I asked, they said, what? It's proprietary. What do you mean? It's like, oh, we can't tell you what's in Coca-Cola because it's Coca-Cola, which is secret. So you're putting injections in millions of people and it's a secret? Then how do I know it worked or not? I don't. That's a problem, don't you think? And let me end my little conspiracy theory there. Next. There are plasmatrophins, and I already mentioned globulins, antibodies. Globulin means protein. And one of the more popular proteins, God bless, is an antibody. When you get sick, your B cells make these proteins, and they look like little Y shape, and they're very specific to that particular pathogen. And those are called antibodies. Right? For example, I worked in the World Health Organization for over a year and a half, and I was in countries that were very heavy in tuberculosis. So what do you think I got a ton of? I have a ton of TB antibodies. That's why when they do the PPT test, or the tuberculin test on me, there's this big, huge red circle, and the nurse will be like, oh, that's wrong. And I'm like, yeah, and then I have to go get the chest x-ray, and I have to get my sputum results because I've got what? A ton of things because I was exposed for such a long time. What else are we gonna need there? There are proteins that control your fluid level. Where should our fluid level be? We already mentioned it. Can I have too much water? No. Can I have too little water? No. I need my water to be where? In the middle. What protein controls that? Albumin. And that's what colloid osmotic pressure is. It's the pressure between the different rooms of your body and your cells. So number one, protein, albumin. I mentioned globulins. Now, remember blood clots? Fibrinogen, the blood clots were dealt with platelets, right? Platelets are little tiny little fragments of cells, and they're very sticky. But they can't clot alone. Need help. So let's say, for example, we can take this side off now. Let's say, for example, this is a blood. We're all blood cells. And this is, let's say, for example, an artery. Now, the arterial wall isn't perfect. Sometimes it breaks. Now, if it breaks like this, don't you think some of us will fall out? And if we fall out, what happens to my homeostasis? Now, I get less blood. That's a problem. What does your platelet do? Your platelet's sticky, but it's small. So I'm small, right? There's still room for you to bleed out, but now I'm sticky. I combine it with that protein called fibrinogen. Fibrinogen is a precursor to fibers. What happens if I put a whole bunch of mud, which is sticky, with a whole bunch of straw or grass? Don't you think it's going to form a mesh? And it's going to gum up this hole? And if it gums up this hole, will any blood fall out? Nope. So you need both what? You need the platelet to make things sticky. You need the fibrinogen to make it what? Fiber, so it can form a net. And then if there's a net like that, all the other cells will bump into it, get sticky, and then will the hole or will the wound or defect in that artery exist anymore? And that is happening all throughout your body. But remember, I need a balance of it. If I have too much fibrinogen, if I have too many platelets, I'm going to get a thrombus. I'm going to get a big blood clot. Let's say this is an artery. Do you think this is a good thing? To have a blood clot in the middle of an artery like this? If I have too much fibrinogen, if I have too much platelets, and this is another scary part. When the blood clot gets free, because you know blood flow is what? And then what happens? That's called an embolus. Then it'll do what? It'll float around and then find someplace small, and then what? Clot. And this clots, remember, if I have too much clotting, can blood now go through here? No. Because now the blood clot, which is too many platelets, too much fibrinogen, now is going to be a what? A bad thing. And where do we always need to be? In the middle. So now you can see how complex our job is. We're not curing anybody. We're not healing anybody. Get that out of your skull. What are we doing? We are managing medicine based on science. And we're always what? Balancing. It's actually in chemistry, it's called titrating. Did you ever wonder why your doctor like changes your meds like every other day and you think they're stupid? Right? Like it's 20 milligrams today, it's 15 the other day. Because what am I constantly doing? I'm constantly doing what? Balancing it. Because when you guys drive on the highway, you probably don't notice anymore because everyone drives like with one finger and like text and tries to fix the radio with their foot. I don't know. I don't know what anyone does anymore. Me, I zone out. So if you ever see the white Odyssey drive by, just give me a wide berth so I don't hit you. But when you're driving, what are you constantly doing? You're not driving like this. What are you doing? You're constantly what? Adjusting. That's what we do in medicine. We're constantly adjusting. That's what your body is doing. But when you're sick, can you adjust anymore? Can't. So we help you. And serum, of course, that's the fluid part. Without the clotting protein. And who is our clotting protein? Fibrinogen. So if you look at this, there might even be a chart on your questions. Or when you're studying it, don't you think this could be one side of a flashcard and this could be the other? Right? By the way, nursing loves their flashcards, but nowadays it's all online. So that as long as you have your phone, you can bring your flashcards. I remember back in the day when I first started teaching nurses, they'd have these big trays of all these cue cards in all different colors, but now you can do it electronically. And also, here's the thing that you have to do if you're doing cue cards. If you get something wrong, always put the wrong one aside. That's called weak point training. Because what's going to improve your score? Not the stuff you already know, it's the stuff that what? You keep on getting wrong, right? So embrace wrong things. They're pretty neat. Red blood cells, there's a majority of it, we already know. We talked about the percentage, right? That's called hematocrit. right, is the ratio between plasma and red blood cells. And women have a little bit lower hematocrit because they have more fat content than our male patients. And by the way, women are supposed to have 18 to 20% body fat. That is not abnormal. That is the normal. So when you go see these beauty queens or whoever, these Instagram models or whatever, that is not reality, right? And also they got filters. And a lot of these, a lot of the exercise industry, a lot of them do lipo. I can tell you right now, almost all of them do Photoshop. I had a previous director. I used to run a graphic design school in McLean, and she worked for Saatchi and Saatchi for 10 years in New York City in the advertising realm, right? And Saatchi and Saatchi is, they're a very, very big company. She said almost all the photographs that you see in magazines, on TV, and everything, they're either filters or they're digitally altered. And I'm like, oh, man, my man crush Jason Momoa does not look like that. No, he does not. And when you got all these people like, oh, I'm naturally this big. No, you're not. I met The Rock. He's 3 times my size. Yes, part of it's genetics, but you don't get, what is he, 51, 52 years old? You don't get that ripped and that vascular. It's not, I don't care what he says. It's not real. Hemoglobin, hematocrit, we already know what red blood cells do.
So the definition of hematocrit
is the ratio between red blood cells and plasma. So let's say men is 46. You don't have to memorize the number, but just know that you could be asked what's hematocrit, and you'll say, oh, it's the liquid part versus the dry part. So if my hematocrit goes up, that means what? I got way too much dry parts. If my hematocrit goes down, that means I have way too much what? Liquid parts. And if I have way too much dry parts, that means I am dehydrated. Now, dehydration easily can kill who? Babies and your elderly, very easily. So this is a very important tool that clinical people use. The shape of this lifesaver is called biconcave disc, right? And the mature red blood cell lives around 120 days. Now, if you recall, I'm not sure what was in your lectures for anatomy and physiology 1, but I'm just going off of the different version of anatomy and physiology 1. If you recall, cells are programmed, right? Everything is programmed. Remember your DNA? DNA tells exactly everything about you. DNA knows the day you're going to die. DNA knows when the day you were supposed to be born. Knows everything, right? So red blood cells, they survive around 120 days. And the liver, the kidneys, and the spleen filter out all the old red blood cells. Right? And what's glycolysis? Glycogen is the storage form of sugar. And the red blood cell can break down sugars so it can use it, so it can live 120 days or so. But after 120 days, your liver, your kidneys, and also a little bit of your spleen starts filtering them out, and then starts, especially your liver. And glycolysis is the breakdown of sugars. So the red blood cell can break down its own sugars. And you're gonna, if you recall, what's the only thing that your body really eats? Sugar, not protein. The 2 things that your body eats, especially your brain, is glucose, which is the 6 carbon sugar, monosaccharide, right? The very, very basic sugar, and oxygen. You deprive your brain or your body of either one. So anything you eat is going to end up sugar. So why do you have to eat so much fat? Well, I know my answer. I don't know yours. Mine is because it tastes awesome, right? Baked Doritos taste like the package that I bought them in. That's why I refuse to eat that garbage. I like full-blown Doritos, right? Doritos have so much oil in them, you could use them as fire starters. Try it. Take a Dorito and take a lighter, and the Dorito will light on fire. And you could use that if you have kindling, if ever you're in the woods. But when I'm in the woods, I don't waste Doritos like that. I just use gasoline like a normal human being. And I eat Doritos and put all that gasoline in my stomach. So red blood cell, really important. It carries stuff. And remember that shape, that biconcave disc shape. Now what's anemia? Anemia is any decrease of number of any blood cell. So let's review real quick. What are our three blood cells? We got a red blood cell, white blood cell, and your platelets. And any reduction in any of the three is a problem, right? Because if I don't have any red blood cells, will I have oxygen going in and out? Nope, right? And that's called erythrocytopenia. If you guys remember that. Remember, how do I know the suffix penia? Remember, small, pennies, not penis, right? If you guys remember that one. I don't remember it forever now. Now that I made that snafu, right? Also, if I have low iron, because the one thing we haven't mentioned yet is inside the middle of that biconcave disc in that red blood cell, we know that it does what? It can give chemicals a ride to where it needs to go, like oxygen and carbon dioxide. We need oxygen, right? And I need to get rid of carbon dioxide. Well, there's something called hemoglobin. Hemo means blood, but what heme actually means is what? Iron. So hemoglobin, even when you look at it, it looks like a twisted up lawn chair that fits oxygen and carbon dioxide, nutrients and sugars, and the magnet that keeps those things in there is iron. So, especially in pregnancy, mommy's giving everything to baby, so mommy is gonna have what? Iron poor blood or iron anemia. And she'll have a reduction in oxygen carrying capacity because why? If I'm giving a lot of my blood to the placenta to baby, I don't got much for me. Those of you who had children, how tired were you those 40 weeks? And the 6 to 8 weeks after? Because why? Your red blood cells got affected because one of the nurses said it best. She was lecturing obstetrics and she kept on calling the fetus parasite. Funny joke, but when you look at it medically, that's what it is. It's feeding off of mommy and it's not symbiotic. Mommy's giving a lot to baby, to the placenta. So think about it. If I don't have enough oxygen, how would you feel? Don't you feel tired and weak? Like remember when the pandemic came around? We were like when the gyms first opened up. You were not allowed to like be in the gym or be on a treadmill without a mask, right? But then you had a mask and then you start running. How many people fainted? Because another thing you're also doing when you're wearing a mask when you're running is now you're spitting out carbon dioxide and then you're rebreathing it. So instead of oxygen, you're rebreathing your waste. That's why you got psychos. My son's one of them. I got him for Christmas a gas mask without the canister. And I go, why? And he goes, I'll show you. Puts it on and ran 5 miles. Then he came back. He was looking at me like, Jesus, what's wrong? He goes, oh, because now he's used to working out with what? A lower oxygen carrying capacity. So what will happen when he has to do something physically arduous? And he's a Marine, so that's what they do, right? When he has to do something physically arduous, now how's his level of taking in oxygen? It's a lot more efficient than mine and yours, because what does he do all day? Trains with that mask on, like a lunatic, right? I see him on the treadmill, with a mask on. I'm getting tired looking at him, because what is he doing? He's rebreathing. He's working with a reduction of oxygen carrying capacity. Actually, at the Olympic Center in Georgia, there's whole rooms of hypoxic chambers, because what are they making the athletes do? They're making the athletes work out in less oxygen, less than 21%. So what's going to happen when they work out in 21%? They're going to have way more strength, way more everything, which is really not a good idea because you guys know how I feel about athletes. I love them to death. I love watching them, but they are the most unhealthy people on the planet because an athlete is built for what? Speed, strength. They're not built for health. We just watched, what was he, 23, 22 years old, have a coronary on the field? I wasn't surprised. I'm like, oh, this should happen more often. And I shared with you guys, one of my classmates from medical school, he is the official surgeon for Team USA Boxing. Every day they faint. Every day they all have anemia. They all have massive joint problems, and they're 18, 17 years old. Imagine 17 years old having joint problems. That's crazy. 120 days, about 3 million RBCs. Hey, do you see they mentioned the life of red blood cells 3 times? So don't you think that's important? Isn't that on the that sheet? It should be, because I now see it 3 times. Iron. Another word for iron is ferrous. So transferrin has to be a protein that'll do what? Trans. What does the prefix trans mean? So if I'm translating, what am I doing? I am getting the message what? Across. So transferrin, what will it do? It will get what? It will get iron that's been recycled, because remember the red blood cells fall apart. So the kidney and liver, they recycle the iron, and then the iron goes back. And another thing that the breakdown of hemoglobin does, it gives the color of our urine and our feces in this thing called bilirubin and biliverdin. You ever see your urine, of course, is what? All different shades of yellow, right? And that's bilirubin. Did you ever look at, well, I'm sure no one sits here and plays with their poops. I hope not. But for those of you who have children, if you ever looked at diaper, especially if they had loose bowel, feces is not really brown, is it? When you look at it, it's what? Really, really dark yellow, isn't it? You ever see like a loose bowel movement of a baby, right? It's really dark yellow. And then when you flush it, you know, the second you put it in the toilet, when it spreads out, it looks like what? Like really dark urine. Because all the breakdown of the hemoglobin, all the pigments, that's where it goes to. And of course, some will go to the kidneys, right? That's your urine. And some will go to your large intestine, which is your feces. But if I have too much, what will it turn me into? Turn me into a bright yellow baby, and that's jaundice. So if you have jaundice, that means somewhere in your body, both the hemoglobin and the red blood cell is getting what? Get eaten up. And that's called hemolysis. Remember, lysis, breakdown, hemo, blood. So hemolysis is the breakdown of blood. And then what will I get? I'll get funny looking pigments in my urine, and I'll also get jaundiced skin. And that's why, you know, if you ever had hemolytic disease in a newborn, where mommy's antibodies are attacking babies, right? And then what will happen to baby? Baby gets very jaundiced, and it's called kernicterus. That's when the jaundice is so bad that the bile pigments start painting the brain of the baby bright yellow. And the baby could get severe brain damage.
Professor, there's a question on the independent review.
Yep, shoot.
What is supposed to be the fate of bilirubin?
Oh, so let's go back. So what's the fate of bilirubin, right? Mixes with bile, right? It can store in the gallbladder. And I mentioned bilirubin and biliverdin can do what? It provides the pigment to my feces and my urine. And that's why how we know that feces and urine have a normal color. And when you see, and some of you text like, oh, but I'm not going to be clinical. how many times I leave my patient alone, either in radiology or in pre-op, and how many times did a tech said, hey, Dr. Garais, I saw something weird. Or something horrible happened, then I asked the tech and they were like, oh, I was busy. What, not paying attention? Right? Just because you're OR tech doesn't mean you don't pay attention to that body in the middle of the room. Right? Remember, ultimately, all of our job is what? That patient. Right? Same thing with radiology. How many times I went down there, the patient is coding, and radiology is sitting there doing what? Taking films. And I go, you didn't hear the Holter monitor? Oh, we shut it off because it was annoying. What? What? You did what? So were they really thinking about the patient? No, they're just thinking about the process. Don't be that person. Too many of those people walking around. Right, so that answers your question. What happens in bilirubin? Here, and of course here. Kidneys can also filter it out. Red blood cell formation. Where do we get hematopoiesis? You get it in bones. Bone is a living, breathing thing, and it does something called hematopoiesis, which is makes red blood cells. Now, remember the kidneys and liver? They're the ones who break down red blood cells. So don't you think the kidneys and liver know when we're short a pint? Right? Because your liver sees a lot of blood, your kidney sees a lot of blood, so it can sense like, hey, wait a minute, I don't have a lot of red blood cells because I have a decreased oxygen carrying capacity. So what am I going to do? I'm going to tell bone through this hormone, and a hormone is nothing but a chemical messenger. And the messenger is erythropoietin. Erythro means red blood cell. Poiesis means production of. And where does it happen? You have red bone marrow and yellow bone marrow in your bones. Where does blood get made? Red marrow, right? Anyone ever have a good oxtail soup?
Yeah.
Or sopa de res? I'm now saying too many horrible things right before lunch. Don't you think that's what makes it so fatty and so good? Right? There's blood in there, so it makes it what? Very salty. And the yellow marrow has got a lot of fat, right? And when you boil those beef bones or oxtail soup, right? You boil those vertebrae, what's going to come out in the broth? All that fatty and salty goodness. But red, think what? Blood. And the hormone that signals the creation of red blood cells is called erythropoietin, and it comes from your kidney and liver. And it comes from your kidney and liver when you are got low oxygen. Because if you got low oxygen, don't you think you're going to need more red blood cells? And look at your kidneys. Look at your liver. It's so intimate with your azygous vein here and your descending aorta. It's right there. So much blood, so it can tell us when we're short a pint. And that's what this slide is. That's EPO. EPO is erythropoietin. It's the acronym for erythropoietin. Okay. All right. Okay. Let's take a deep breath before we jump into this, because this is one of the hardest things to get down regarding blood types. Okay. So when you're looking at blood type, question. What was it? Was it again stem cells? Which one is it? A blank? I guess we didn't go over that part yet. Well, ask me that when we get past it, because maybe they'll answer it somewhere else. But my guess, and I don't remember all the slides, but look up pluripotent cells. Pluri means what? Many. When you have something that's potent, that means it's what? It's going to grow, right? If you have something that smells that's potent, it's what? So pluripotent cells are stem cells that can be anything. right? And that's why we're very, very interested in stem cell research because all those fetal cells, just imagine if we can figure out how to program them. So let's say, for example, I need a new heart valve. You guys can't give me one because do you have a Nelson heart? No. So if you try to give me your heart, I'll reject it, right? But what if I took a stem cell or a fetal cell, right? Went back in time and when I was a fetus, grabbed up some of my cells, and then I messed around with the DNA and made a new heart. That's what real cloning means. Like, we're not really trying to clone a human being, that's impossible. But we're trying to take the stuff that is uniquely yours and clone it. And pluripotent cells, those are the kind of cells that become anything. So I think that, but you can Google that and look up that answer, but my guess is pluripotent cell. So let's look at blood type. Now, when you look at blood type, and let's do my blood type, for example. My blood type is B pos, or B positive. When you look at somebody's blood type, there's a B pos, AB neg, goes A pos. You're looking at two blood types. The letter and whether it's positive or negative. The letter part is this part, and that's your ABO blood typing system. So, for example, right, I am B, right? Let's not look at the pos or negative right now. So if you're looking at, how many people have B? No? Anyone know their blood type? Nobody? Oh, I wish.
How do you figure that out?
I just well, we're gonna show you how we do it in the emergency room.
I know mine I can give to everybody, but I can only receive from one.
All right, so we'll figure out who you are out of this, right? So you are a universal donor. Well, just think when you're looking at blood types, I want you to only think of the letters first. Are we all good? So I am B pos. Don't look at the pos yet. Just know, oh, he's B. Now what does that mean? You have four blood types, A, B, and O. Now, you see these things with the shape on it? Those are glycoproteins. Those are antigens. See this little pin that's a purple circle? This is a gray diamond. This is a purple circle and a gray diamond. So if you're on team A, what kind of jacket do you have? You have A antigens. An antigen is a glycoprotein coat that starts the trouble. If ever you guys watch any, like those corny gang movies like from the 80s, right? When they're like Bloods and Crips, or like maybe a 50s movie, right? If you see like, I don't know, the Jets and the Sharks, if you saw somebody with the wrong jacket, what would happen? There would be a fight, wouldn't there? And that's what transfusion sickness and giving the wrong blood type to somebody happens. Because the A gang has what kind of jacket? A antigen. They have a glycoprotein coat. That's what? A. And that's why they're called what? Blood type A. Blood type B. What kind of jacket or antigen are they wearing? B, because they're in what? They're in the B gang. How about if I were in the AB gang? AB gang has some money. They not have one jacket, they got what? They got both jackets. So they have A and B jacket. But O, think what? Big goose egg. O, think what? Zero. They don't have any jackets. So that's one question that could be asked. If my patient has A type A blood, what kind of antigen do they have on the red blood cell? And you'll tell me A. If my patient has type B blood, what kind of jacket or antigen do they have on their red blood cell? B. If it's AB, both. Type O, nothing. So we're all good with that part regarding the jackets. Now, in a gang, you got your enforcers, don't you? You got your thugs, right? Every gang, those corny gang movies, there's always this big dude in the back. Who can do both? Right? Am I the only one who watches bad movies? In the A gang, who don't they like? They don't like those Bs. Not part of my turf. So I got a bunch of thugs, these Y-shaped antibody proteins called anti-B, because they're against the Bs. That's why I cannot give B blood to an A patient, and that's why I can't give A blood to a B patient. Because if I have my thugs, if I have my antibodies, don't you think I'm gonna get serum sickness? There's gonna be a fight and bad things will ensue. Question? Well, I'm gonna get to that. But right now, do you know who has what jacket? We got that down. Now we know who has what thugs. A has what kind of antibodies? Anti-B. B has what kind of antibodies? Anti-A. Now, since AB has both jackets, right? They're everyone's friend. So do they need any thugs? Do they need any antibodies? No. Right? So AB is the universal recipient. Because I love everybody. I got a blood jacket and my crypt. So I can't get into any trouble. And that's the universal recipient. Now the O, they're broke. Right? So they don't have any jackets. O for what? Broke. None. If you don't have any jacket, that means you can give type O blood to who? Everybody. So the O is the universal donor. Donut, donor. Universal donor, universal recipient. Oh, look, someone wrote it there. So what could we ask you? Which one's a universal donor? Type O. Which one's a universal recipient? Type AB. What kind of antibodies does A blood have? Anti-B. What kind of antibodies does B blood have? Anti-A. Even easier question. A blood has what kind of jacket or what kind of glycoprotein coat or what kind of antigen on the red blood cell? A. B has what? B. AB? AB. Both A and B. And O, they don't have any jackets. Now, that's the only ABO system. That's what? The letters. Now we got to talk about the positive and negative part of your typical blood type, which is Rh factor, which is something different. So everyone good on this? This is golden. This is good. Now let's talk about Rh. Now, let's look at this. Agglutination is when the proteins start clumping. And you guys remember those old 70s cartoons? Remember when Roadrunner and Wile E. Coyote get into a fight? Right? It's just what? Madness. Right? It's just clumping. So do you see here like how the blood and all the serum here is homogeneous? There's nothing going on here. But do you see here the blood starts clumping up? Because all those little Y's hook up to all those antigens, and then what happens? There's a fight, and that fight is called agglutination. That means there is a reaction. So if you see something like this, this is how we test your blood, which is going to answer the question. We put 3 wells, actually 4 wells. The 4th well is controlled to see if the test is actually working. But let's say the test is working, we're all good. Then we put in 1 well antibodies for A, antibodies for B, and the Rh factor is antibodies for what? D. So you have A, B, and D. So if there's clumping and agglutination in A, that means this person has what kind of blood? Type A blood. There's no agglutination here, so there's no B. So this person is what? Type A. What if, I think about this, what if there was clumping only in B? Then my patient has what? B blood. What if there was a clumping in A and B? Then my patient has what? AB blood. And what if there was no clumping in anti-A, anti-B? then my patient has what? O blood. And I'm gonna put, I have some sample questions from my other class that has the full spectrum of all the possible combinations. But what's RH factor? That's the anti-D. So this person, we definitely know is A blood, right? But see this clumping in D? That means they're positive for RH factor, also known as rhesus factor. And that means this person has A pos blood or A positive blood. And why do we need to have compatibility? Because if we don't, we already saw what happens. That the antigens will start reacting, and then you'll have serum sickness. And I'll put something out later today, which is which will show more examples of this.
RH is rhesus.
RH is rhesus factor, and that's the what? The positive or negative part of when you look at somebody's blood type. So when you look at my blood type, which is B pos, the ABO typing is what? B. And the pos means I'm positive for anti-D antigen, which is a rhesus factor. Now, let's go to white blood cells. These are my warriors, right? White blood cells, warriors, they're gonna fight infection. You have two types, granulocytes and agranulocytes. The granulocytes, if you look at neutrophils, eosinophils, and basophils, they have a lot of granules inside their cytoplasm. And if you recall your anatomy and physiology 1, those granules were filled with lysozymes. They were filled with enzymes that did what? Eat things. And this is how I remember it. What do you fill a pothole with? You fill it with what? Granules. So neutrophils, eosinophils, basophils. Now what's an agranulocyte? The agranulocytes have less of those little dots in them. So if you look at the monocyte and the lymphocyte, there's no little dots in them, right? See? You see there's no dots on this lymphocyte and this monocyte? It's like, I don't know, it's a cluster of ball of dirt, but there's no dots like this. You see how your eosinophils and this have dots and your neutrophil? Now, these are all white blood cells. Their function, all of their functions, is to fight infection or fight potential pathogenic bacteria. Now, what does pathogenic mean? Gen, creation of, patho, disease. Anything can make disease, even dust. Dust is made out of what, 60, 70% human dead skin cells? But to an asthmatic patient, it's death. And what else do you need to know? This cell, I think there's a thing that you have to write down where what each one does. So let's look at it. You look at the first one. Let's look at neutrophil, eosinophil, basophil. If you look at the neutrophil, you see the purple nucleus? To me, it looks like chicken dinner. You ever see like a 3-piece Kentucky Fried Chicken? There's like, oh, I know I'm talking about food too much. You see the lobe, it's multilobular. That's why your neutrophil is also called a PMN, or polymorphonuclear nucleoside. And its function is phagocytosis, right? And it's up top because it's the #1 player. And it comes out all day, every day. And phagocytosis is what white blood cells do to pathogenic bacteria or virus or fungus. It surrounds it, and then it eats it, and then breaks it down with all those little granules. Eosinophils, I want you to think parasites, and you get a lot of eosinophils when you have a parasitic infection or an allergy. And it releases a lot of histamine. And we know, for those of us who have hay fever, histamine is what? Allergies, right? So if I got a ton of histamine, I got a lot of inflammation, and you know how debilitating that is. And last but not least, basophils, another set of allergens. The monocyte, this small little thing, and they call it a monocyte because it's like one big, mono is what? One. or this one big ball, and this turns into a thug, turns to a very large cell macrophage. That's why I call this the monocyte. I call it Dr. Banner. Remember Dr. Banner turns into who? The Hulk. So monocyte rolls around, but then when there's trouble, what it'll do? It'll hulk out, it'll get very big. And that's what a macrophage is. Macro means very big, and phage means to eat. So when you look at all these, aren't they the different types of white blood cells? Also known as your differential. Have you guys ever heard of that? You hear the doctor or nurse go, hey, I'm gonna order a CBC with differential. CBC, complete blood count. How much red blood cell, how much white blood cell, and how much platelets you have. But what's your differential, or diff? You ever hear that, CBC with diff? Diff tells me what? The percentages of all of these. And if I have a lot of neutrophils, that means I have some sort of bacterial infection. If I have a lot of eosinophils, I'm thinking what? Parasite, right? Might have to give an antihistamine to my patient. So you could see how the presence of different white blood cells can kind of diagnostically tell you, what's going to happen. All right, hang in there. Let's finish up the white blood cells and then take a break. What do they all do? They all do something called diapedesis. Dia means complete or thorough. Peds means to walk. So what happens? Let's say I'm a white blood cell, and this is a cell wall of an artery. And that hand sanitizer is a bacteria. This is what white blood cells do. Remember, your red blood cells all have different jackets? Well, so do all the bad guys. Bad guys also have different antigens. So I see a bad guy over there chemically. So what do white blood cells do? Dia, complete or thoroughly, peds. They step and walk out of the white blood cell and they march towards the bad thing. And that's diapedesis. Now, why did they do it? Because of something called positive chemotaxis. Chemo means chemical, and what does a taxi do? Taxi brings you to where you need to be. So right back there, that Purell thing, that's a pathogen. I need to kill it. So what's going to happen? My white blood cell is going to physically step out of this blood cell, and then it gets attracted, and then it kills it. Neutrophils, granulocytes, lymphocytes. Oh, let's talk about lymphocytes. We already just mentioned AIDS and HIV, T cells. Just know you have B cells, T cells, and NK cells. T cells are what they call cell-mediated immunity, and that has T helper cells and T cytotoxic cells. Now, what does a T helper cell or CD4 cell do? So let's say, for example, that this is a pathogen. This is a nasty virus, and I got to get rid of it. So your T helper cell, I call it the tattletale cell. So T helper, CD4, does this, and remember that chemotaxis? It starts spilling a whole bunch of chemicals, and it's in effect yelling, hey guys, chemically, hey, let's kill this, gotta kill this. And remember our thugs? Natural killer cell, T cytotoxic, macrophage. Remember, do they think too much? Thugs. What do? Right? They're gonna come, and they're gonna take care of this, and they're going to phagocytize this and kill it. Now, what do B cells do? The T helper goes, hey, we did you guys this favor, and that's now called humoral immunity. So they tell the B cells, hey, I don't want to be back here again, so why don't you guys make antibodies so you can remember it faster so I don't have to do this again. So the T helper then tells the B cell, hey, it looked like this, it looked like a chair, it had like 5 wheels, recognize this guy. And then the B cell makes what? An antibody that can kill this all by itself. And that's why when you have a vaccine, and you already have antibodies, you get rid of the pathogen much, much quicker the second time around, because you saw it before, right? Now, don't you find it ironic or kind of crazy that HIV attacked the one thing that linked both systems? Isn't that awful? Right? It could have attacked macrophages. It could have attacked a neutrophil. But what did it attack? The one thing, it's called an antigen presenting cell, the one thing that tattles on what? The pathogen, the bad thing in the system. And that's why HIV back in the day used to be so debilitating. But guess what? We figured out how it does it, and then we did what? You can't get rid of HIV because remember, how big is a virus? Is it very big or very small? It's very what? Extremely small. So let's say this is a virus, right? The T helper is going to want to kill this, yes? You see it. Where is it now? It's inside the cell. It's so small that it's inside the cell. So it's performing a home invasion. Can we do anything about it? No, until the cell dies and about 10,000 of these things start floating around. Okay, fine, we killed 8,000 of them, but how about the 2,000 that now go in other cells? And that's the reason why we cannot fight the common cold, because the common cold is a coronavirus. That's why you can't fight RSV. You can't fight COVID, because once it's inside, can I do anything anymore? Can't. Neutrophils, we already talked about phagocytosis. I want you to think bacterial infection. There's a lot of polymorphonuclears. The nucleus is, I call it chicken dinner. See how it looks like, like nuggets, and that's how I remember it. Eosinophils are bilobular. Again, Phil has a lot of the granules. Bilobe nucleus, bi meaning two. They're good for parasitic and or allergic reactions. Basophils, I want you to think histamine and heparin. Heparin is an anticoagulant, it's a blood thinner, and histamine will increase the inflammatory process. So that's why basophils are also big on allergies as well. And a monocyte grows twice its size to become a macrophage. And what's the function of macrophage? To eat stuff. Lymphocytes, B cells, and T cells. B cells make memory cells or antibodies, because remember, the antibody remembers. And T cells, I want you to think what? T cells target, what a better word for it is tattletale. The T helper cell grabs on to the pathogen in question and then tattles, then tells the whole immune system, hey, this is a bad thing, let's go kill it. Now, just use your medical terminology powers. Anything Pena means what? Reduction. Anything cytosis, too much. And leukemia, that's what? Cancer. And the differential is the percentage of each different white blood cell type that we just talked about. All righty. I'm okay on time. So I'll pause and 10 minutes. Nice little 10-minute break, and then we can now finish up blood. So we're at the tail end of it.
So are monocytes and lymphocytes the same thing as T cells and B cells?
No, B cells and T cells, I want you to think they're from lymphocytes, right? Your lymphocytes are what do you call it? Agranulocytes. So that'll be one set. And then another set of the agranulocyte are your monocytes. And monocytes turn into macrophage, right? So that's another set. And then between the B and T cells, which one does the memory? B, right? And which one does the tattling? T. And then you have what? T helper cells, which is CD4, T killer or natural, not T cytotoxic cell, CD8, and then you have NK cells, which are natural killer cells. Now, who are all the thugs? Natural killer cells, macrophage, and T cytotoxic cell. That means what? They're big, they eat, but they don't think too well, right? They're like bouncers in a club. You got to point them, right?
Okay.
So who points them? The tattletale, the CD4 cell. That's the one that goes, hey guys, this thing. And then, but the CD4 cell is also lazy. They're like, I don't want to do this again. So if the B cell, could you guys make some copies, make me some antibodies, so you'll remember this, so I don't have to come back to this.
Okay.
Right? And that's like that's the little party in my head on how it works out. And I like you guys, from my previous lectures that I like looking at things in a very simplistic way, so I could never forget it.
Yeah.
And then if you want to do complex, you just what? Add to the story.
Yeah.
Add to the party.
The actual word.
Yep.
Okay. So.
There is